Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, Education with Ellie, and today we're going to be talking about how antidepressants work. This lecture podcast is based on the information provided in Stahl's from Psychopharmacology, and so a lot of the diagrams are similar. So if any of the information seems like it's worded a specific way, similar to that textbook, it's because I got it from the textbook. So we're going to be talking about how antidepressants work, and we're going to be talking about SSRIs, SNRIs, NDRIs, and SPARIs. And then we're going to talk about some examples in each of these categories and how these medications exhibit their effects and what types of things that these medications are used for, because not all of them are just used for depression. A lot of them can also be used for anxiety, OCD, PMS, PTSD, social anxiety disorders, even helping with seasonal affective disorder, and other things like that. So let's get into it. So we're going to start with SSRIs. These are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. These guys are super cool because the key feature about these guys is they're all SERT antagonists. So they're all going to be inhibiting the action of SERT, which is a serotonin reuptake plasma membrane pump. So let's get into this. So I'm just going to draw on some more of these receptors. I realize I erased more of them than I would have liked. Okay, so there are receptors. So coming from the raphe nucleus, which is the primary place where serotonin is produced in the brain, there are neurons that project out of the raphe nucleus into different parts of the brain. And some of these parts include the locus coeruleus, which produces norepinephrine, the basal forebrain, which produces acetylcholine, the tuberomammillary nucleus, which produces histamine, and then dopamine comes from the prefrontal cortex, but also they're parts of the brain as well. So anyway, just know that the raphe nucleus is going to be projecting, and the serotonin will be able to exert influence on a bunch of different parts of the brain and control their release, and also control maybe their inhibition as well through potentially the effects of GABA. So we have SERT, which are these purple pumps here. And normally they will be reuptaking serotonin into either the somatic dendritic area, which is this area right here, or this is also what most people think of, the axon terminal, so the synapse, and there are these guys here that will reuptake into the presynaptic neuron, but actually a lot of the effect of SSRIs has been shown to be really beneficial in this somatodendritic area up here. So when you first take an SSRI, and this is just generally speaking for these SSRIs, what's going to happen is if they have a SERT antagonist, which all of them do, you're going to be blocking the action of these SERT pumps. So this is going to increase the level, and I'm going to use yellow dot for serotonin. This is going to be increasing the level of serotonin present in the somatodendritic area, because less of it's going to be pumped into the axon. Dendrites. Not axon, dendrites. And the receptors, so assuming that if someone's depressed, they have a higher receptor density on both the postsynaptic neuron, but also a higher amount of autoreceptors present, so these serotonin 1A receptors, because there has been a lack of serotonin, or a lower level of serotonin present in the somatodendritic area. So the cell is going to be upregulating the receptor in order to try to sense any serotonin that is being released. So an increase in the serotonin here will cause an increase in signaling of these 5-HT1A autoreceptors. And 5-HT1A autoreceptors are inhibitory. So what's going to happen is this is actually going to inhibit serotonin firing initially. But then, this is the key. But then, because there is increased activation of the 1A receptors, these are going to be downregulated and desensitized. So downregulated and desensitized. And this is key. So you have the downregulation, you have the desensitization. So you're getting rid of the inhibitors. So if you get rid of how many receptors are able to inhibit, then you're going to have an increase in excitation. So let's just get rid of some of these guys. Boop. She said, boop. No more. Boop. Oops, not that much boop. Okay, there we go. So you still have some of these guys, inhibiting, but way less. So this is going to be, so now you're going to have this increased activation of the neuron, and this is going to result in increased serotonin release in the synapse. So then we see this increase in serotonin release, and the postsynaptic neuron has also upregulated its receptors. And so that is why the increase in serotonin here is also going to cause the downregulation and desensitization of the postsynaptic membrane 1A receptors. So we'll just get rid of some of these guys. And then this is going to be less inhibited now because there's less receptors. So this is going to result in an increase in increase in neurotransmitter release downstream. Now, it is important to note that there are SERT pumps present here. So those will also be inhibited by a SERT antagonist, but it's not as big of an effect as the people originally thought. So this alone, just in this synaptic area, is not enough to cause all of the effects of a SSRI, and that is why typically you don't feel or they say that you don't feel the full effects of an SSRI until 3 to 4 weeks out, because the downregulation and desensitization of the 5-HT1A receptors takes a while. Think of all the transcription and translation and intracellular messengers and signal pathways that have to happen. I mean, that's just a lot of words. That's a lot of buzzwords. Basically, just things have to happen. It's not just immediate flip a switch on and off. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's the vibe of that. But this still does play an effect. So theoretically, this would in the synapse, you would have an increase in serotonin immediately as well. But because it doesn't discriminate somatodendritic, synapse, whatever. But anyway. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the drugs. So Prozac is unique because Prozac is a common example. It's approved in children, and it is also a 5-HT2C antagonist. And this is important because the Raphe nucleus communicates through a GABA interneuron to the prefrontal cortex. So if you block 5-HT2C, which is present on the GABA neuron, then you will decrease the amount of GABA being released because 5-HT2C is an excitatory neuron, and so then you have an increase in norepinephrine, dopamine. So that's why Prozac is cited to be activating and energizing. Zoloft is both a SERT antagonist, has a sigma subunit, and then also a little bit of a DAT antagonism effect, but only seen at super high levels. Also, Prozac has a little bit of a net, as in norepinephrine reuptake transporter inhibition antagonist effect at really high doses. And then we also have Paxil and fluvoxamine. All of these guys share that they have that SERT antagonist, but Paxil is actually interesting because it also has a nitric oxide synthase inhibition, which can cause sexual dysfunction, and it also has weak net antagonist effects. So yeah, so this is just SSRIs. Okay, so scrolling on down, let's move on to SNRIs. So these guys are not, it's not just one, but two, and actually a little bit of like 2.5, because you also got some dopamine situation going on. So let's go here. So same thing's going to be happening, right? We have the SERT antagonism effect. So we're going to have that inhibition of the SERTs. So we're going to have that increase in, oops, let me make this bigger. This increase in serotonin molecules floating around. Okay. She got the increase in serotonin molecules. She's floating. She's activating. Okay. So increase in serotonin. This is going to be doing the same thing. It's going to be downregulating. So it's going to be activating the 1A receptors, which are inhibitory. And then those are going to become, or say it till the cows come home, desensitized. Oops, I don't know how this. Desensitized. Plus down-regulated. If there's anything you're going to take away from this, just remember, desensitize and down-regulate. Desensitize and down-regulate. So, boom, boom, oops, boom. Take that one off. Okay, there we go. Boom. Less inhibition means what? More activation. So, less inhibition, we'll get rid of some of these guys. And then we have more activation, boom, boom. And then this means that we're going to have increase in neurotransmitter release. And if it's triggering something like dopamine or norepinephrine to be released, you got increased signal transduction. Increased signal transduction through monoamine signaling can also mean increased levels of cyclic AMP response element binding protein, which increases BDNF, which is an important transcription factor, brain-derived neurotropic factor, and it promotes synaptogenesis, neurogenesis, cell proliferation, neuroplasticity, all the good things. Okay, now this is really cool. So now we're getting into like the cool part. So it's an SNRI, so it's a serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. So not only do we have serotonin, we also have norepinephrine. So norepinephrine, okay, so she's coming in. She's in the axon terminal. So normally you have this norepinephrine release, boom, boom, boom. And then you have these net, which are reuptake pumps. So these guys normally will repump up the norepinephrine into the norepinephrine neuron. But we also have this dopamine neuron right here. And dopamine in the prefrontal cortex does not have DAT, which are the reuptake pumps for dopamine, present on the neurons. So any dopamine released here is not reuptook by the dopamine neuron. Actually, though, the net, this guy, has a strong affinity for dopamine. So because it has a strong affinity, it's like you walk into a candy store, right? And your mission when going in is you want Skittles. But then you see the M&Ms and you're like, wait, I like M&Ms better than Skittles. So you start loading the cart with M&Ms. You got all those M&Ms. But you also got some Skittles. You know, you got both. You walk out of there with both. It's a 2-for-1. So if you inhibit, in the case of an SNRI, you have that antagonist for the net. So you say no more net, block the net. Not only are you going to be blocking the norepinephrine reuptake, you're also going to be blocking dopamine reuptake, because the norepinephrine, the nets, are also the reuptakers for the dopamine. So they're doing two things. Dopamine is just kind of like slacking off. The dopamine neuron, she's like, I released my dopamine, just let it be, let it fly. And then the norepinephrine neuron is like, okay, I see you, I'm going to take you up, I'm going to take you in with my norepinephrine. But when you block it, you block both. So now you got an increase in norepinephrine and you got an increase in dopamine. So this is just like really a 2-for-1. So this is important to know, though, because if you're prescribing one of these drugs, like if they have some sort of condition where dopamine is already high, you do not want to do this, because now you're going to be increasing the dopamine even more. So you got that increase in dopamine level. So this is just showing like the radius, like there's going to be a greater diffusion radius, because now the dopamine is not going to be reuptake at the same rate. So it's going to have more signaling in the prefrontal cortex, and so you got this 2.5 type of action situation. And this examples are Pristiq and Cymbalta. So Cymbalta is like really used for more like pain relief, based on like what I read. And Pristiq is also used for like depression. Both of them seem to have pretty strong like withdrawals. Both of them have net or SERT antagonism, and then also a little bit of net antagonism, high net antagonism for Pristiq, moderate net antagonism for Cymbalta. Make sure I'm not missing any of these. And then I'm also using like the brand name. So this is desvenlafaxine and duoxetine. So desvenlafaxine is Pristiq, and then duoxetine. Okay, so now we did the first two, and these are the hardest because like we had to like kind of preface. But now we're getting into, this is like basically the last two are just kind of more reflection on what we've learned, because this is just like a slight difference. So let's get into it. So SPARIs. So this is like a newer type of antidepressant. So it's, instead of a full agonist, it's a partial agonist. So partial agonists, they bring the level of activation to like halfway. For example, if you have a agonist present, then you're going to be lowering the amount of activation, so it's going to be a net antagonist. But if you have an antagonist present, it's going to be increasing the amount of activation, so you'd have a net agonist. So it depends on like what the environment is, and that's why it's important to know like what is going on inside of the brain, or inside of the environment that you're putting this drug into, because that's going to determine how a partial agonist is going to affect the person or dog or whatever. Because I know some dogs that have been on Prozac. Okay, anyway, so got that cert again. Okay, so this is really cool. Vibrid, also known as where's my little things? Oh, vilazodone. Yeah, vilazodone / Vibrid is a SERT antagonist and a 5-HT1A antagonist. And we talked about the 5-HT1As. We talked about how they're all up over here. They're inhibitors. So this is going to theoretically, because I actually don't know, because I've never taken this, and also like how it should be is not always how it is. So originally we had to wait. So you did this inhibition of the SERTs, and that's going to cause, as we noted, an increase in serotonin present around the neuron in the somatodendritic area primarily. And normally this would cause an increased activation of the 5-HT1A receptors, and then that would result in, remember, desensitization and downregulation. Desensitization and downregulation. But because we have a 5-HT1A and partial agonist, and there's going to be higher amounts of serotonin present, now it's going to act as a antagonist, so it's actually going to be blocking. Oops, let me choose a different color for the drug. The drug is going to be green. Vibrid's going to be green. It's going to be blocking only like some of them. Also, this is only going to be some of them. I forgot about that too. If it's a partial agonist, it's not like as intense, so it's not going to be blocking all the SERTs. So some of them are still going to be open. So there's not as much of an increase in serotonin, but there still is an increase, just not as much, because theoretically we have lower serotonin levels. So we have this blockage due to the drug. And since it's a partial agonist, it's going to be acting as an antagonist, though, because serotonin is present. So this is going to result in an inhibition of these inhibitors. So that's going to result in like a net activation. So it's like kind of jumping, like you're not going to, theoretically it shouldn't take as long to feel the effects, because you're not waiting for the downregulation and desensitization. So you're not waiting to turn off the inhibition from the 5-HT1A receptors that you would have had with like an SSRI. But because it's a partial agonist, it also doesn't do this to as many receptors, and it's not as quote unquote like strong. So the side effects are less, but it also means like people say that it doesn't really work or it's not as strong. It doesn't have the same like potency that a normal SSRI would. So I don't know, cool idea. Partial agonists are really cool. Also because of like, they have like a max engineered dosage where like you can't overdose on it because it, once it hits its like max activation, like you cannot activate more than the max. Whereas a full agonist like does not have that. So yeah, so you're still gonna have this activation. Sorry, I get distracted easily. You're still gonna have this activation. And when you have this activation, but we're gonna have the drug down here too, right? So some of these are gonna be blocked as well. So you're gonna have this activation. So then you're gonna have this increased serotonin, which is gonna result in the removal of some of these guys. Plus, the drug is gonna be there. So the combination of desensitization and downregulation, plus inhibition of the 5-HT1A should result in an increase in neurotransmitter release. So you got this downstream increase. So that's Vibrid, also known as vilazodone. Super cool, super interesting. Yeah, okay. And then finally, we're going to be talking about NDRIs, norepinephrine dopamine reuptake inhibitors. An example of this is everyone's favorite, Wellbutrin. So we've already gone over how inhibiting NET is going to cause an increase in dopamine. Also, I realized I used yellow for dopamine and I used yellow for serotonin, so sorry about that. I didn't even think about that when I was color picking. Okay, and then also an increase in norepinephrine, obviously, because it's from the norepinephrine neuron. But the dopamine is like cool. We went over how it's kind of like a double threat with the NET. Okay, so we got this increase in both, increase in signaling, boom, we got increased activation of the prefrontal cortex. Things are happening. Scrolling down though, Wellbutrin is not only, note here how it says norepinephrine dopamine reuptake inhibitors. So this is the NET. But what about the D, the dopamine, the DAT? This is the DAT that is inhibited. And where is the DAT? Well, it's not in the prefrontal cortex because we said that dopamine doesn't get reuptaked by DAT in the prefrontal cortex. But where is the DAT? In the mesolimbic pathway. So if you go from the ventral tegmental area or something like that to the nucleus accumbens, there are DATs present there, and there's also DAT with the nigrostriatal pathway, which is involved in like movement. But with the mesolimbic pathway, you got this projection from the ventral, so I'll put the VTA, ventral tegmental area, to this nucleus accumbens. And this is going to be activating downstream pathways. And this pathway is really involved in like auditory hallucinations and like delusions. So feelings, positive symptoms associated with psychosis. But obviously like, that's like really like a lot. This is just like it's not as strong. So it's not going to cause like psychosis. But you would not want to give this a drug that has DAT inhibition to, or DAT antagonism to a patient that's bipolar, or a patient that's actually bulimic either, because it can result in seizures, specifically Wellbutrin. But, so we have this DAT here. Label this as DAT. So this would be reuptaking dopamine, but we're going to be inhibiting. And there are D2 receptors on this GABA neuron that is kind of like the inner neuron, or it is the inner neuron in between mediating like what happens. So if you inhibit that, then you're going to have an increase in dopamine present. And this increase in dopamine is going to increase the inhibition of GABA release. So you're going to have low GABA. And that means that whatever is downstream is going to be activated. So if it's glutamate, it's going to be activated and cause like an increase in positive symptoms. And that is why if you have over excitation of the mesolimbic pathway, you end up with positive symptoms. So yeah, that's how that works. So this is described as like super activating, more energizing. It's also used to treat a lot of the sexual side effects associated with typical SSRIs. There's no SERT antagonism here. But anyway, yeah. So that's my little summary on all the drugs that I learned about thus far in antidepressants. So hopefully that helped. Hopefully that's cool and outlined some of the features. And hopefully I didn't ramble too much. But yeah, anyway, thanks for watching.